Russia 30 years ago, 35 years ago, was certainly the poorest country west of, I don't know. Who even knows? I mean, Bhutan? Really poor. And divided and sad and defeated, and alcoholism and drug use and gasoline huffing and suicide were endemic. And who did that? Well, the Russians to some extent did it to themselves. You know, they were living in this Soviet system for 70 years. But outsiders did it to them too. That's a fact. And whatever you think of Putin, he's bad. Putin got that under control. And Russia in 2026 bears no resemblance whatsoever to Russia in 2000, the year Putin took over. And one of the main changes he made is he kicked the money changers out of the temple. He did. Sorry. Everyone else has forgotten that, ignores it. He kicked the oligarchs out, or he brought them to his side. You can't act independently of the national interest. Sure, you can become a billionaire, but some of it has to go to the country. And that was spun in the West as cartel behavior. He's the mafia boss. Okay, fine. He's the mafia boss. But the real answer to the question, did it work or not, is obvious not just in the numbers, but in the state of the country, the visible state of the country now versus 25 years ago. It's a completely different place. It's no longer Bhutan. It's not Africa. By some measures, it's much richer than any country in Western Europe. In fact, by every measure it is. By every single measure. Is it richer than Spain? Is it richer than the UK? Oh yeah, much. So that is both tempting to elites from around the world. Wait a second, why do 140 million Russians get all this stuff? We should have some too. But it is also an indictment of their leadership. If you're Boris Johnson and your ancestors ruled the waves, ruled the British Empire, and your country is a kind of sad Urdu-speaking museum now, that's insulting. Really, the Russians? Those weird half-Slavic, I mean, they dominate world chess, but like, really? They're not really white, and how are they doing so well? This is outrageous. It is an indictment of your own leadership, and in countries across Europe, the leaders feel that way. Russia is an embarrassment to them because it is, relatively speaking, thriving. And so they all, as one, backed the Biden administration's plan to have a war with Russia. And let's stop lying. This was not an unprovoked invasion. Putin just randomly went over the line into eastern Ukraine and stole these oblasts. He stole this land that belonged to another people. That's a total lie. And it's not a defense of Putin to call it out as a lie, because it is. And everybody knows it now. The truth is that in 2001, Putin, same guy, same leader, asked the Bush administration in person, directly to George W. Bush, I would like to join NATO. I would like to join the defensive alliance that exists to keep me from moving west into Western Europe. In other words, you won. I'm joining your team. And due in part to his own limitations as a leader, and due in part to the counsel that he received from Condoleezza Rice at the time, George W. Bush turned down that offer and prevented Russia from joining NATO. And the guest we're going to speak to in a moment, if you're wondering if he has a good track record of calling future events, said at the time, this decision to turn down Vladimir Putin's, this is 25 years ago, Vladimir Putin's request to join NATO, to join the West, to all be in it together, to work together. This decision made by the Bush administration guarantees a collision with the West. We are now on a collision course. And of course, he was absolutely right. Because NATO didn't want Russia because NATO wanted a war with Russia. And boy, they got it. And so from 2001 all the way to 2022, 21 years, NATO moved inexorably east, surrounding Russia. And many times, again, this is not a defense of Russia. It's just a fact. Many times the Russian government under Putin said, whoa, 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 whoa. You are threatening our core national interest, which is not to have other people's missiles on our borders. Back off. And then in 2014, the Obama administration overthrew the government of Ukraine to put an American puppet in there, thereby sealing the fate of nations. When that happened, and Sergei Karganov said it at the time, you have just guaranteed a war in Ukraine that will destroy Ukraine. So as you listen to the interview, and we hope you listen carefully because the English is not flawless and it was done over satellite from Moscow, so it's not the best audio, but it's worth listening. That man that you're going to hear has a long track record of calling events right. And it's not to detract from his powers of perception or his intellect, which is formidable, to say other people could have drawn the same conclusions because it's pretty freaking obvious. If you exclude Russia from NATO, you're probably seeking a war with Russia. And if you try to put nuclear armed missiles on Russia's border, you're probably going to get a military response. That's exactly what he said. And of course, he was laughed at in Europe, where he'd spent a lot of his life. And he was totally ignored by the United States. And our policymakers were on to this, that, or the other thing. They were not paying any attention at all. And to the extent they were very excited for this war with Russia. And they never really explained why. And then once that war began 4 years ago, they began to act through their proxy, the Ukrainian government under Zelensky, truly a proxy, in a war that has been managed from day one, in part by the CIA, our CIA, targeting by the CIA, and anyone who tells you that's not true is lying. They began to act with not just recklessness, but extreme recklessness, the kind of behavior that suggests you don't care about the consequences at all. You're just all in. Actually, at some point, the kind of behavior that suggests a death wish, that suggests, like, I actually want a nuclear holocaust. I'm happy to risk the lives of my family, my nation, and the world in a nuclear exchange. And we know that because of what they did. They blew up Nord Stream, which was the main source of natural gas for Europe. So that did two things. One, it destroyed the European economy. That was obviously going to happen. And it did. Because you can't have a robust economy, certainly not a manufacturing economy, without cheap energy. Without cheap energy, you're left with what? Real estate and finance. And of course, the people making these decisions are familiar only with real estate and finance because that's the world they live in. But in the real world, countries become rich and powerful and stable and resilient because they make things. So that's the first thing. We blew up Nord Stream. So that destroys our supposedly closest allies in Europe, particularly in Germany. Germans hate themselves so much they won't even admit that we did it, but we did it. Through proxies, but we did it, as we said we would. And the second thing that it did is send a very clear message to Russia, we're done. We're not going to have a kind of Vietnam scenario where we have a proxy war, but, you know, there are limits to our behavior. Yeah, we'll spray Agent Orange, but we're not actually going to, you know, level Hanoi. We bomb it on the edges, but we're, you know, there are limits to what we're going to do because we don't actually want a war with the Soviets. American and NATO behavior since the beginning of this war suggests there are no limits at all. Blowing up Russian infrastructure, trying to assassinate Putin repeatedly. They lie about it, but yes, they have. Yes, they have. The Ukrainian government has tried to assassinate Vladimir Putin multiple times. Has the CIA assisted with the targeting of those drones? Yes, obviously. Tell me how you didn't. No one's even asked them. And again, it's not taking sides against the United States with Russia. No. It's trying to think clearly about what are the potential consequences of this kind of behavior, torquing it up consistently over 4 years to a point where you've cornered a great power. Oh, but that's the problem. They don't consider Russia a great power. They're not a great power. You know what Russia is? Russia's a gas station with nuclear weapons. Watch this.
I think economic sanctions are a very important step. Identify these kleptocrats and look, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country.
It is a wounded and declining nation. It has an uncompetitive economy. Senator McCain used to joke that Russia is a gas station pretending to be a country. Its declining population, of course, contributes to its decline.
What's your view of Putin? Look, I think he's got grand ambitions. I think he's hostile to the United States. But I think the thing that we've seen is he doesn't have the conventional capability to realize his ambitions. And so he's basically a gas station with a bunch of nuclear weapons.
If the president could rally the world to push back against Russian aggression and really hit them economically, have sanctions that hit really hard, then Putin is basically a gas station masquerading as a country.
There's really nothing more embarrassing. And as someone who knows all four of the men you just saw say that, you pause and you think, we are a great nation. This is the United States. We're a great nation. And we should be led, in particular, policies that matter, that could determine whether your children live or die, should be led by great men. Men with wisdom, above all, restraint, a sense of longitudinal interest. It matters what this looks like in 100 years. That should be part of the calculation. And knowledge and lived experience. And none of those four men you just saw, all four of whom have been major players in formulating U.S. foreign policy over many decades, none of them meet any of those criteria. These are weak, unwise, in the case of John McCain, though very charming, I will say, low IQ people. True. That's just true. They don't know anything. So you could say, everything about Russia I found repulsive. Everything about it offends my sensibilities as an American. That's fine. People feel that way. But you can't dismiss it as a gas station with nuclear weapons because that reveals you as ignorant. Because it's the opposite of that, of course. On a cultural level, the country that produced Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, more than a gas station. But it also suggests that you are doing the one thing you can never do with an adversary, and that's underestimate his power and resilience. You have to see the people you're in conflict with clearly, or you will get hurt. That's the real risk here, not just you'll act like the ugly American, you're a buffoon. They're a gas station with nuclear weapons. What a clever line. I heard that from my donor. I'm going to repeat it on Meet the Press, which is exactly what the poor DeSantis, doesn't know anything, was doing, trying to sound statesmanlike. Oh, I just heard this. Well, gas station with nuclear weapons. So good. You know, you reveal that you're just a rube. Go back to Orlando. But it's more than that. You can wind up way over your head, and we are now way over our heads because of that attitude. Lindsey Graham, who, to his credit, has been around, he's been everywhere, Lindsey Graham has still not picked up the one quality you hope that travel instills in a person, which is wisdom. Zero. And there's a particularly sad line at the end of the clip you just saw from Lindsey Graham where he said, if just we can make our sanctions tough enough, we just need tough sanctions, and that will bring Russia to its knees. Well, we did that, actually. But who got brought to his knees? Was it Russia? No, it was not. It was us. One of the saddest things this country's ever done is sabotaged its own currency over time. But if you were to isolate a moment where the U.S. dollar's future became dim, it would have to be in the Biden administration's immediate response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That was the moment that we kicked Russia out of SWIFT. We just stole the personal property of people who didn't work for the Russian government, the so-called oligarchs, which just means businessmen. Just took their stuff because they had Russian names and prevented Russians from playing in international sporting events. You can't be at Wimbledon. There's an OV at the end of your name or whatever. So we humiliated ourselves, of course, by behaving. Who behaves like that? But we also sabotaged our own core interest, which is the maintenance of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. That's the key thing that we have. It's not our manufacturing base that makes us rich. Sorry. Wish it was. It's the U.S. dollars, the privilege of holding the currency that, say, energy transactions are conducted in. Everyone has to use dollars. It's called the petrodollar. Been there since 1971. You tamper with that, and the bills come due, and you become poor. And then all the downstream effects of poverty, which include violence, by the way, and chaos. That was the single most unwise thing any administration has done in my lifetime, 56 years. That was the dumbest thing. That was the most self-destructive thing. So what was gold trading at? Do you remember? If you got a phone in your hand right now, look it up. What was gold trading at, just say February 1st, 2022? About $1,700 an ounce, which is high, was high. You check gold prices today, the spot price of gold today, it's about $4,600 per ounce. Has the S&P grown that much in 4 years? No. Has anything? No. Why gold? Is there some new industrial application for gold? No. There are some, but not really. People are buying gold as an option to the US dollar. Gold is what you buy when you want out of the dollar because you don't believe it has a bright future. You dump your treasuries and you buy gold. And the people who actually understand the system because they made it and participated in it and are its biggest players are doing that. China is doing that. Now, why in 2026 would you dump treasuries, which they have, a lot of treasuries, and buy gold, the most primitive medium of exchange? Like the Assyrians use gold. Gold? Only superstitious people buy gold. I'm not making the case that there's some inherent quality in gold that makes it valuable. I'm making the case that compared to what? You're doing that because you believe the US dollar is unsafe. And why do you believe that? Because the US government just used it as a political weapon against a great power. That's why. Anybody could have figured this out. And the second thing that happened almost immediately is that Russia formed a durable alliance with China. Now think about this for a second. And Donald Trump, to his great credit, used to say this. The worst thing Biden ever did was drive Russia into an alliance with China. Why is that the worst thing? Because here you have the largest economy in the world, which is China, and you have the largest resource density in the world and the biggest country in the world, which is Russia, combining against you. So I think by anybody's count, there are four really kind of major players in our near to long-term future globally, and they are the U.S., Russia, it's more than a gas station with nuclear weapons, sorry, India, and China. Now, who knows where India is going to land, but if you've got Russia and China against you, it's tough. That's not only not unipolar, that's like an actual threat to your interests. That's an actual threat to your... Don't allow that. The reason Richard Nixon flew to Beijing 50 years ago, 55 years ago, and met with Chairman Mao, who, by the way, was a lot more of a monster than Putin's ever thought of being, was not a Christian, unlike Putin, killed 100 million of his own people. Richard Nixon flew there anyway and, quote, opened up China, made an alliance with China. Why? To split it from Russia. Because he understood that was the threat. The bloc, the alliance of countries that don't share our interest, is a massive threat to us and to the dollar. He did that, and it worked for like 50 years. Until Joe Biden, with the help of the U.S. Congress, probably the largest collection of unwise cowards in the English-speaking world, got together and decided that they could levy sanctions against this country, which they deemed bad for reasons they never really explained, except Russia reacted to their provocations and went over a border that no one can find on a map. Because of that, we needed to act and do something because we're Winston Churchill, not Neville Chamberlain, and everything's about World War II, and we need to stop Russian aggression. By the way, we were on Russia's side during World War II, but shut up, you're not supposed to know that. And we're going to punish them, not by actually joining the Ukrainian military and putting our lives on the line because, hey, we've got better things to do than go die in someone else's war, but we're going to sanction them, very tough sanctions. Despite the living proof that not only do sanctions not work, they are counterproductive to the stated aims. And if that's untrue, what happened in Cuba exactly, which got sanctioned in about 1960? Oh, Raul Castro is still alive and still has power in that country. The country's gotten poorer. Don't think Raul Castro has. They don't work. They have the opposite effect. And by the way, they are dishonorable and feline. They're a weak man's form of diplomacy. When Lindsey Graham is running around pretending to be tough, the man with the size 5 shoe is telling you he's the man on the scene, you know what you're watching is pantomime. It's acting. You're watching a weak man pose as a strong man. And the decisions that he makes reflect that. That's why they all love sanctions. But in this case, in this specific case, sanctions shafted the United States. And I think it's worth saying that out loud so our grandchildren looking back on this time and asking, why don't we live like our grandparents did? can assign appropriate blame. Sanctions did not punish Vladimir Putin. They punished the United States, and they completely destroyed Europe, which is where our ancestors came from and where our religion comes from. So it's not a small thing. But they didn't work. And by the way, neither did the military action that we spent hundreds of millions of dollars paying for in Ukraine. A military action that was never designed to liberate Ukraine, but to beat Russia, whatever that means. How can you beat a cohesive ancient empire? Probably can't. When this country was founded 250 years ago, Russia was an empire. It's not like us, okay? Russia will be here. We know that, whether you like it or not. So deal with it in a constructive way. But they couldn't. And so once the war got rolling and it became really, really clear that we had lost, we haven't lost. What are you, a Putin puppet? Okay, really simple metric. Putin rolls across the border into Ukraine, really just like a satellite of the United States in the Biden administration, but rolls into this supposedly different country, and we can't get him out. No matter how many hundreds of millions of dollars we send, no matter how many biolabs we have there, no matter how many threats, CIA officers we send over there to do the targeting of the drones, still there. And they're not leaving. So what does that leave you with? Well, again, I would refer you to not the smartest foreign policy strategist we have, but certainly the most cable-friendly, Lindsey Graham. Watch this.
How does this end? Somebody in Russia has to step up to the plate. Is there Brutus in Russia? Is there a more successful Colonel Stauffenberg in the Russian military? The only way this ends, my friend, is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out. You would be doing your country a great service and the world a great service. I'm hoping somebody in Russia will understand that he's destroying Russia and you need to take this guy out by any means possible. Yeah, I hope he'll be taken out one way or the other. I don't care how they take him out. I don't care if we send him to The Hague and try him. I just want him to go. Yes, I'm on record. Please understand, Senator Lindsey Graham, if John McCain were here, he'd be saying the same thing, I think. It's time for him to go. He's a war criminal. I wish somebody had taken Hitler out in the 30s.
Live by the sword, die by the sword. Do you really want to call for the extrajudicial murder of another head of state? Is that a precedent you want to live with? Probably not, actually. Probably not. And if you're a country that believes in the rule of law, pretty shocking thing, really, for a lawmaker to say, well, just assassinate him. It's just a tool of foreign policy. No, we're not Israel. We don't conduct foreign policy through assassination, actually. We shouldn't. Apparently now we do. Is that okay with people? You don't like someone, so you just kill them? If those are the rules, we will have to live with those rules. And you don't need a particularly powerful imagination to envision how that ends, and not well at all. So if you're going to be a beacon of freedom, be one, and call the just to account and don't punish the innocent, which is why sanctions are not only ineffective, but also immoral. But moreover, if you're waging a war against a country, and we've been at war with Russia for 4 years, despite what the liars tell you, we have been at war with Russia for 4 years, probably not a good idea to admit that you're losing on television, which is what Lindsey Graham just did. We have no choice but to take him out. And third, it's probably unwise to admit that you know nothing about the country that you are fighting, that you're obsessed with. Taking Putin out will solve the problem? Putin is an absolute dictator? He's dictatorial, that's for sure. You probably wouldn't want to walk by the Kremlin and give him the finger. He'd probably be punished for that. But does he have absolute control over Russia? Does any leader of any country ever have absolute control over the country? Did Stalin? No. He consulted with the constituencies in his country. They all do, every one of them. Our president, every emir in the Gulf, every king, sultan, potentate, head of the CCP. Everyone's got a board of directors in this world. Everyone. And Putin is no different. And Putin, again, like every head of state, is balancing a bunch of different shareholders every single day. You got the FSB and then divisions within the FSB. You got the military, You got the business community, the oligarchs, as we call them, very different from our oligarchs who are just tech CEOs. They're oligarchs. But everyone's got a piece of this enterprise they call Russia, and everyone gets a say. And no head of state acts unilaterally. So the idea that you take Russia out and everyone just gives up, oh, Putin's gone, we can, I don't know, turn it over to Zelensky, is ridiculous. And only someone who didn't understand how the world works would say something like that. So what's the point? The point is exactly what we've seen in a lot of other countries. Iraq, Syria, you hope not Iran, but likely cause chaos. Because in chaos, I can dominate and I can steal. And the people who are paying me to have these views, a lot of them are exiled Russian oligarchs who Putin kicked out, can get back in there and scoop up the resources. There's no reason Putin should control all the bauxite in Russia or whatever, all the oil, all the gas, all the gold. We should. So create chaos in this country, the biggest country on earth with 150 million people and the largest nuclear arsenal, and I'll get rich. And even if you signed up for that program, which you shouldn't because it's disgusting, but let's say you did think that was a good idea, part of your reptile brain would start beeping red, alert, alert, alert. That's really reckless because I can't control what happens next. There are too many nuclear weapons in this country. They have massive military industrial power. They make a lot of weapons. They make a lot of steel. They have a lot of cheap energy. This is a real place. And it's got a huge Muslim population, 20%, and they're kind of peaceful now. Will they be? These are the kind of things an adult would ask himself before calling to knock off a head of state. You could destroy the world. But they haven't asked themselves those things because they don't care. And above all, they are unfit for leadership of the West. And that includes our foreign policy establishment, and it includes virtually every single head of state in Europe. And for that, they are on the cusp of being eliminated. Literally. And I'll just speak for myself and say, I really hope that doesn't happen. Yes, Keir Starmer's a joke. Of course, he's an insult to our ancestors. If you're English, he's an insult to our ancestors and to that nation. Of course, Macron is ridiculous. Germany, ugh. But do you want to see them destroyed?